So Nathan just read part of this, but we're going to read Luke 23:44 to 49 again. It was now about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sun's light faded, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, calling out in a loud voice, said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And having said this, he breathed his last. Now, when the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God, saying, "Certainly this man was innocent." And all the crowds that had assembled for this spectacle, when they saw what had taken place, returned home beating their breasts. And all his acquaintances and the women who had followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. So, if you've ever read, and if you went to school, I don't know if they still do, I think the school system seems to be dropping a little, but you should have read Shakespeare. And in Macbeth, Shakespeare works really hard to try to compare the death of this king, Duncan, this good king, to the death of Jesus, because he makes all these references to the cross. And the night when Duncan is killed, strange things happen in the world. All creation comes undone, it seems. And the next day, there's darkness. And two men, Ross and this old man, are speaking. And Ross says this, "By the clock it is day, and yet dark night strangles the traveling lamp. Is it night's predominance or the day's shame that darkness does the face of the earth entomb when living light should kiss it?" And so they're trying to figure out, what's the purpose? Why is it dark? How come it's gotten dark when it shouldn't be dark? And this is the question we're going to spend a few moments reflecting on here. Why does it get dark at Calvary? What's the purpose of it? And why is it that even on Good Friday, the traditions are that you come into a dim sanctuary? It's not quite as bright. The shades are down. And why is it that it's quiet? Why do we celebrate and commemorate this time with hushed tones and darker things? Why? Well, as we peer into the darkness a little bit of Good Friday, you're going to see the incredible power of it and why it's something that the church continually looks at, and why it is a time of year when was the real thrust of the church Historically, the church would use Easter as a time to not just baptize new believers, but to really tug at the heartstrings of people, because the story of the cross and the resurrection are so powerful and so important and significant. And so we're going to see very briefly that Good Friday condemns us, calls us, and changes us. Okay, so quickly, we'll try to jump through those. So, condemns us. Darkness, if you've read the Old Testament or spent any time in the Old Testament, you know that the day of the Lord comes within darkness. Every time God speaks about his day of coming in judgment, it's shrouded and wrapped in darkness. He dwells in darkness and thick clouds. And so we read in places like Zephaniah 1:15. A day of wrath is that day, a day of distress and anguish, a day of ruin and devastation, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of cloud and thick darkness. Amos 5:20. Is not the day of the Lord darkness and not light, and gloom with no brightness in it? And so here's one of the things, this may shock people, but it shouldn't. On the cross, on Calvary, despite the fact that wonderful hymns say it, and I don't like saying these things because I know it challenges the worship team at times, but God did not turn his face away from Christ. You will not find any scripture saying that he did. Quite the opposite. On the cross, Jesus quotes Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And when he does so, most scholars think he probably read the whole psalm, quoted the whole thing up there because he's suffering. And if you read that psalm, which is all about the cross, what does he say in 24? For he has not despised or abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, and he has not hidden his face from him, but has heard when he cried out to him. And so on the cross, understand at Calvary, God is not absent. He is very present, but he's present as judge. And this is why every other time Jesus prays, in every gospel, every time he prays, he calls him Father. But in that one anguished cry, when he's quoting Psalm 22, he says, my God, because he's facing for that moment God as judge. And you'll notice the gloom and the darkness lingers until the 3rd hour, right? 3 o'clock, or so the 9th hour, sorry. And so it starts at noon, ends at 3 p.m. And it says, and at 3 p.m., so in other words, when the gloom lifts, he says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. So it's as the gloom lifts, he then again sees God as Father, and he's restored. And so what we need to understand is he is present, and that darkness comes because on the cross, Christ has been made sin for us. He becomes sin. So all of that devastation God promises on the day of judgment, that day comes down completely on Christ on Calvary. And so you and I, by his wounds, are healed. This is where we get this from. It's not something we've made up. It's riddled all through Scripture. 1st and 2nd Corinthians says it over and over. But you'll notice something. The gloom and the darkness doesn't just hit like a spotlight on the cross, but Luke tells us it comes over all the land. It descends upon all the land. And why? In fact, Luke wants to be so sure that you know that the darkness doesn't just come on Jesus, but comes across the land, that he assembles this very diverse cast of characters around the cross. All the Gospels do. In fact, God did it. He orchestrated this diverse cast of people. And who's there? Well, there's a centurion there. The centurion, we don't know his implication as far as how much he was involved. Did he arrest Jesus? Was he involved in the torture? Was he one of the ones mocking him or gambling for his clothing? Did he stab him with a spear? Did he nail him to the cross? We don't know. But what we do know is, as a symbol of Rome, he stands there and represents all the unbelieving world. And as such, he represents power's failure to recognize God and its sin before God. So he stands there condemned, this centurion. Not just him, we have the spectators, the crowds. Notice what, and we just read it, the crowds that had assembled for this spectacle. You know, any public execution is made for public consumption. You don't kill someone publicly without having a purpose and trying to send a message to those watching. And so, I mean, it's the same thing, listen, on Valentine's Day. You don't need to put something on Valentine's Day about how you love your wife. You only do it because you want somebody to praise you for being a good husband. Just public spectacle. And so when they put Jesus on the cross, make no mistake, the Romans knew what they were doing. It was to say, don't do this yourself, because this is what happens to people who defy Rome. They stripped him, and he's probably naked on the cross. I know we tastefully put loincloths on him, but he's naked probably, because it's a humiliation to Jesus. And the crowds came not to worship, not to mourn, not to see justice, and not to protest injustice. They came to watch a man die. And we do this often. And so they came as spectators to see a spectacle. And so they're condemned as the crowd standing around. And then we have his acquaintances, Luke says, and the women who had followed Jesus. Now they're there, and make no mistake, they are also condemned here. Yes, they're his followers. Yes, they believe. But have you noticed what he says? They stood there at a distance watching. Now, you could say, well, what else could they do? What could this motley crew do against Rome? Well, that's exactly the point. Nothing. They're weak. They could do nothing. They were either unwilling or unable to stop what was happening, even if they had wanted to. And I'm not saying they're bad human beings. Well, they are. They're sinners. But the purpose of it is to say, do you see how nothing intervenes to save Jesus here? He is completely abandoned. That's why the Gospel of Mark has nobody around the cross. It says everybody abandoned Jesus. There's no one left on his side at this point. He stands condemned completely. And so we recognize with that old hymn, which does have the line about Jesus turned his face away. It's not old. I think it's a new one. It says that, behold the man upon the cross, my sin upon his shoulders, a shame I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. You and I, like it or not, all of us, our voices echoed from Calvary to today. You were present in some regard there because your life has proven it. So we all stand condemned. And one of the great challenges is this. Good Friday reminds us of this commendation, how we are condemned without Jesus. And so we are actually called to sit in that gloom. And this leads us to the second point. Good Friday doesn't just condemn us, but it calls us to something. And notice what God does. He doesn't send a momentary eclipse, which we're about to see in a week. Instead, what he sends is darkness over all the land, something that cannot be ignored at noon. And he does this, again, not in a moment, but all the land is covered. There's no way you could have just written it off, said, oh, it's nothing, just a cloud passing. And you can't even pass it off as a natural event, which we'll talk about in a moment. But Charles Spurgeon gets this pretty well. It's a lengthy quote, but Spurgeon, this guy has, I tell you, Spurgeon, for a man with no education, what a brilliant wordsmith he was. Here's what he says about this time. Business stood still. The plow stopped in mid-furrow, and the axe paused uplifted. It was the middle of the day when men are busiest, but they made a general pause. Not only on Calvary, but on every hill and in every valley, the gloom settled down. There was a halt in the caravan of life. No one could move unless they groped their way like the blind. The master of the house called for a light at noon, and his servant tremblingly obeyed this unusual summons. Other lights were twinkling, and Jerusalem was a city by night, only men were not in their beds. How startled were mankind! Around the great deathbed, an appropriate quiet was secured. I do not doubt that a shuddering awe came over the masses of the people, and the thoughtful foresaw terrible things. Those who stood around the cross and had dared to insult the majesty of Jesus were paralyzed with fear. As many as could do so, no doubt, stumbled to their rooms and endeavored to hide themselves for fear of awful judgments which they feared were near. And so the natural tendency when everything goes dark is to turn on a light. The problem with that for us Christians and for all the world is if you turn on a light, you'll never see what you were meant to see in the dark. There's a desire by God to have your eyes get accustomed to what's in the dark for a moment. And we know this because it's not just a flash of darkness. It's not like that light that hit Paul on the road to Damascus. It's not a moment. It's 3 hours long. And this is why we know naturalistically, if you're a skeptic or a non-believer and you were dragged here, what you cannot say is this was a natural event. Because one, history attests to it. So we have non-believing Christians and Romans and Greeks talking about the fact that there was this odd occurrence. And what we do know is this as well. First, there cannot be an eclipse on Passover because Passover follows the phases of the moon. And during a full moon, it's impossible to have an eclipse. Every physicist, every astrophysicist, every astrologer, astronomer, everybody knows this. And so we know it's impossible that there was an eclipse during the Passover. Second, eclipses come slowly. You're going to see that in a week. It gets darker slowly, and then it's dark, but it's not midnight dark. Second, they're going to last, 2 minutes? 2.5 minutes? Not 3 hours. And so what happens here at Calvary is a miracle. It is something that God does to rattle us and to draw our attention, to say, you can't just pass this off and say, well, for a moment it'll be okay. After 3 hours, you start to think, gosh, I better start making a plan, because this may not let up soon. Kind of like, remember about almost exactly 4 years ago, COVID hit. And the first couple of weeks, the world was really great, right? First few weeks, we thought, this is easy enough. It's just temporary. So we can get over this. We can do crafts online, and my job, I can work remotely. Everything was good. But as it lingered and went on and on, we all, as a race, as humanity, had to figure out, well, now what? If this isn't going away, what does it mean for my life? What does it mean for my rights as a citizen? What does it mean for everything? And the same sort of thing is happening here, where in the gloom of Good Friday, you and I are asked to sit in it, not just for 3 hours, but you and I ought to, if we really want to make the most of this, try hard to sit in it until Sunday. Try to sit in the gloom of Good Friday and for a few hours at least, and really try to figure this out. And this is why. Good Friday is a call to us, a call to sit in this place of darkness long enough that our eyes become accustomed to the dark so that we can see as clearly as possible the man on the cross for our sake. And here's the final part about challenging or changing us. The beauty of Christianity is this. The longer you sit in the darkness of Good Friday, the more you begin to see what the incredible thing that happened in the darkness. And you don't see it in a moment. You don't see it necessarily, but as you linger in it and stare and your eyes get accustomed to it, you see more. And what you see is something quite incredible. And I'm going to use examples for it. So C.S. Lewis wrote this book called A Horse and His Boy. Most of you have read it if you've read the Chronicles of Narnia. And in it, there's this boy Shasta. And Shasta is on this journey. I won't belabor it. He's on a journey. And his journey is fraught with all kinds of problems. And all of his trials come seemingly at night. And then finally, near the end of all of his trials, he's walking, he's alone, it's dark, and he's miserable. And in the misery of his nighttime walk, here is what Lewis says. And being very tired and having nothing inside him, Shasta felt so sorry for himself that the tears rolled down his cheeks. What put a stop to all this was a sudden fright. Shasta discovered that someone or somebody was walking beside him. It was pitch dark, and he could see nothing. And the thing or person was going so quietly that he could hardly hear any footfalls. What he could hear was breathing. The thing, unless it was a person, went on beside him so very quietly that Shasta began to hope that he had only imagined it. He went on at a walking pace, and the unseen companion walked and breathed beside him. At last he could bear it no longer. "Who are you?" he said, barely above a whisper. "One who has waited long for you to speak," said the thing. Now, in the darkness, he thinks he's alone. In fact, if you read the whole passage, he says, "Are you a giant? Are you an enemy? Are you a predator?" Because in the darkness, it's terrifying. You know what's hard about darkness is you don't know what to expect. Light creates some degree of expectation. You know what to expect. If you walk into a room, you don't know if you're going to bump into something if it's dark. But if you turn on a light, at least you can see and navigate. And he's terrified. And what he finds is the first words say, "I was waiting for you to speak." But then the next thing, after he asks him, "Are you a giant?" the next thing he says is, "Tell me your sorrows." And so what he finds when he stares in the darkness and gets accustomed to the person beside him, is that this thing isn't out to kill him, but instead out to comfort him. And that all along, all of those trials, he was the one who was with him this whole time. And the darkness at Calvary does the same thing. The darkness of Good Friday gives us immediate, and it ought to give you immediate terror. It ought to at least terrify you. Because if it is true that the Son of God was killed, and you and I are all culpable, and you're not afraid, it's because you don't believe he was really the Son of God. Or you believe you're not culpable. But if you actually understand what you've seen, if you allow your eyes to get accustomed to it, then what you see is that you are culpable. And then, you know what Luke does as a brilliant storyteller? He's got our eyes fixed solely on this hill where this is happening. And yet for one verse, he takes us out of the hill, away from the hill, and into the temple. And he says, there, the curtain was torn in the place, the Holy of Holies, from top to bottom. And then he jumps back to the hill. And so what we know as readers is the significance of what happened. That there was a dividing wall between us and God, and that what happened on Calvary on Good Friday destroyed that dividing wall. It ripped it apart from the top to the bottom, not from the bottom to the top. And remember, we're talking about a piece of fabric that was about an inch thick and 30 by 30 feet wide. So it's not something naturalistic. You can say, well, somebody tore it. Listen, my friends, you need a 30-foot ladder. You need something to cut it and then rip it down the middle. And you'd have to do it all without any Jews seeing you do it, because you'd be killed if you even got near it. So this is not accidental. And we now know what is happening. We have the benefit of knowing that Good Friday is our salvation, which is why it's difficult for us to only mourn on Good Friday, because we know by his stripes we are healed. But those in attendance, those around the cross, may not have known exactly what we have the benefit of knowing, but they knew something, because it changes them. If they sit long enough in it, they see something. And here's how we know it. The centurion saw something, and he said, and Luke tells us, he praised God, saying, certainly this man was innocent. So something happens in this man. The crowds that went there for blood, that's what they went there for a spectacle. When the light lifts at 3 o'clock, and Jesus prays, what do they see when the light comes on? The blood is on their hands. And what do? They run home, returned home beating their breasts. So they are changed because they sat in the darkness. Even though that centurion sat there for 3 hours to make sure Jesus was dead, those people came to watch him die. And then at the end of it, they're both saved. They're both given a reason to change their minds and to repent. And the faithful who sat there watching, they were saved before. I don't think they were saved after necessarily. But what they did see is they saw exactly what Jesus came to do, and they began to understand it. And we know they did because they started telling people about it. And so everyone is transformed. And you and I on Good Friday every year stand in the same sort of darkness. We're invited back in to stand in the midst of that and we're asked, will you sit long enough? Will you not take the flippant way out and just say, it's all poppycock, it's all silliness, it's all just lies for a different generation, it's just an eclipse? Will you do that, or will you actually have the integrity? And I say integrity because it's true. If you're not a believer and you have never bothered to really investigate Christianity, but you've listened instead to sound bites, or even listened to the very persuasive pain of your experience and said, because my life is so miserable, there's no way this could be true. If you're that person, I challenge you, and Good Friday challenges you every time, to sit in the darkness. And even if you're a Christian, do it. And this is where we'll close. Christina Rossetti was a poet in the 19th century. And she wrote a lot of things. But one of the things she did, she had this assembled a bunch of poems on devotions. And one of them was about Good Friday. And she laments in this. You see her anguish in it because she realizes, although she's a believer, she looks at the cross and feels nothing. She looks and she's like, I'm not really moved by what I see. And listen, I know there's many Christians at Redeemer and everywhere else who have called themselves Christians for a long time, but they know that something is wrong. They know it because they know they have no desire to seek God. They have no desire to live for Him. They don't want to read the Bible. They don't want to serve. They want to worship. They're caught up in their own world, and they come to church, and they do the right things, but they know, and you know if you're one of those people. And Rossetti started to feel that way. And so she writes this poem saying she's embarrassed and shocked because she looks and reads the scenes of the cross, and she says, everybody was changed. The centurion's changed. Peter was changed. The thief was changed. The women there were changed. She says, but she says, I sit at the bottom of the cross like a stone, unmoved. And she ends the poem with this little, very short refrain. Yet give not over, but seek thy sheep, true shepherd of the flock. Greater than Moses, turn and look once more and smite a rock. And what she is saying is, don't look past me. I can't feel it. I don't feel it, but I want to. Don't walk past me. You're the shepherd. Seek me, please. You have to, because I can't find you. I'm trying. It's not working. You have to seek me. Greater than Moses, turn and look. She takes that from what happens to Peter. When Jesus looks at him, remember when he forsakes him? She's saying, look at me now. And smite a rock. And you know from the wilderness, when the rock was smitten, what happens? Water flows. And Jesus says, if you drink from me, water will flow from you. So she's saying, please, I don't feel it. Everybody else feels things. Everybody else seems to be saved. I don't feel it. Smite a rock. You have to do it because I can't. And so, if you feel like Rossetti, if you feel like the spectator, the women at the cross, the men, the centurion, whoever it might be, take heart. Because that is the purpose of Good Friday, is to make you feel like one of them. You're supposed to feel that way. But also take heart in this, that just like them, there is a voice calling to you from the darkness. And He is bidding you to follow Him and eagerly await Sunday, when the gloom will finally scatter by the dawning of the resurrection. Let's pray. Now, Father, thank you for the cross. It's one of the great, the world has mocked us as Christians forever. There's ancient graffiti with a donkey on a cross where people mocked Christians 2,000 years ago, and they continue to. And Lord, that's okay, because the thing that they mock is the greatest thing that ever happened to us, and hopefully for them as well, and hopefully they'll come to see it. Lord, they mock us because it seems strange. It seems strange that the only way to save us was this way. And yet this is what we believe, this is what you say, this is what we attest to be true. Father, we thank you for it. Thank you that you didn't come down off the cross when those people, when everyone was mocking you, when all of us have mocked you at some point. You didn't come down and say, okay, that's enough. You instead bore it all. You bore all of it, and that was nothing. To bear our mocking was one thing, but to bear the judgment of your Father was literally unimaginable for us. And we thank you that you did it. We thank you. And help us, Lord, to settle in this time. Help us to soberly reflect on the cost of the cross, knowing that you don't want us to know exactly what it cost, or you would have asked us to pay it. And yet let us sit in it for a moment. Let us dwell and think about our own wretchedness without you, so that we can then come to Sunday and worship all the more. God, you are holy, you are glorious, and you are wonderful. Let the world mock, but let everyone who has a believing heart praise you for your goodness. You are awesome, and we love you, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.